My parents sold my lake house to pay for my sister's $150,000 wedding. They laughed, saying, "Thanks for the wedding gift." I smiled and told them to check their mail, and their faces froze when they saw what was inside. You know that feeling when you pour your entire soul into a dream, build it piece by agonizing piece, and then, in one gut-wrenching moment, it's ripped away? That's exactly what happened to me. My own parents sold my lake house, my sanctuary, without my permission, all to fund my sister's extravagant wedding. And when I confronted them, they actually laughed and said, "Thanks for the wedding present." They had no idea what was coming next. Growing up, the family dynamic was always crystal clear. I was Marcus, the responsible older brother, expected to set the example. Gabriella? She was the precious baby, could do no wrong. Our parents, Robert and Diana, were behind this imbalance from day one. They probably never even realized how obvious it was. Gabriella wanted dance lessons. Money appeared. I needed a computer. For school? I mowed lawns all summer. New clothes for her, hand-me-downs for me. A brand new car. For her 16th birthday. I worked 2 jobs to buy a beat-up Honda with 150,000 miles on it. Honestly, I never resented Gabby for it. She was sweet, in her own way, just incredibly sheltered. How could I blame her for accepting what our parents so freely gave? Instead, I focused on building my own path. After high school, I put myself through community college, then transferred to a state university, studying computer science. Those 4 years, a blur of classes, part-time jobs, instant ramen, and barely any sleep. My first tech job paid just enough to cover rent and student loans, but it gave me experience. I lived in a tiny studio, bought nothing I didn't absolutely need, and poured every spare hour into learning new skills. When that company downsized, I found another position, then another. Each move brought slightly better pay, considerably more responsibility. By 27, I had launched my own software consultancy. That first year was terrifying. Some months, I truly wondered if I'd make rent. But gradually, clients began referring other clients. My reputation for solving problems others gave up on earned me premium rates. I hired my first employee by the end of year 2. By year 5, we had a team of 12 in a downtown office. Through all of this, one dream kept me going: lake house. As a kid, my grandfather would take me fishing at Pinewood Lake. Those rare weekends were the only times I felt truly peaceful. The mist rising off the water at dawn, the gentle lapping of waves against the dock, the sweet scent of pine. I promised myself, someday, I'd have a place there. 3 years ago, I finally found it. A small cabin on 2 acres with 100 feet of shoreline. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms and outdated everything. But the location? Perfect. The asking price made me nervous, even with my business doing well. But I ran the numbers, made it work. I put down 30%, secured a 15-year mortgage, and became a proud property owner. Every free weekend went into renovations. I replaced the rotting deck boards myself, installed new windows to better capture the view, updated the ancient kitchen. Trevor, my best friend since college, helped me rip out the musty carpet and install hardwood floors. We'd celebrate with beers on the dock after finishing each project. That house represented everything I had worked for, a physical manifestation of my journey from the kid who was never given anything to a man who had built something for himself. I was in the middle of planning a bathroom renovation when Gabriella called with her big news. She was engaged to Jackson Fleming, son of a prominent local family who owned a chain of high-end car dealerships. I was genuinely happy for her. Jackson seemed like a decent guy, despite his privileged background. When she asked if she could host a small engagement gathering at my lake house, I agreed without hesitation. That gathering turned out to be my first warning sign. My parents arrived early already, talking about the wedding like it would be the social event of the season. My mother walked through my home with a critical eye, pointing out what she called rustic elements to Jackson's mother in a tone that sounded like an apology. My father pulled me aside to ask about expanding the deck to accommodate at least 100 guests for the reception. "The house is not available for the wedding," I said firmly. "It's too small, and I'm in the middle of renovations." "But just imagine how beautiful it would be," my mother interjected. "Photos on the dock at sunset, the lake as a backdrop. The Flemings would be so impressed." I stood my ground. I'm happy to host a small family dinner or something, but not the wedding. They dropped it, or so I thought. Looking back, I realized that was the moment they began seeing my property as a family resource rather than my personal home. The seed had been planted. Over the next few months, Gabriella's wedding plans grew increasingly elaborate. What started as talk of a reasonable celebration morphed into discussions of designer gowns, exotic flower arrangements, and a guest list approaching 300 people. My parents seemed obsessed with impressing the Flemings, who were known for their extravagant lifestyle. We need to show them we're not just some ordinary family, my mother said during a Sunday dinner. Jackson's cousin had live swans at her wedding. I watched them with growing concern. Both were in their early 60s, still working full-time with modest retirement savings. These wedding expenses would derail their entire financial future, but they brushed off my concerns. Some things are worth spending on, my father said dismissively. Wait until you have children of your own. You'll understand. Despite my reservations, I offered to contribute $5,000 toward the wedding as my gift to Gabriella. It was generous, but within my budget, and I made it clear that was the extent of my contribution. My sister hugged me with genuine appreciation, while my parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. I should have paid more attention to that look. Instead, I went back to my life, focused on growing my business and enjoying my lake house whenever I could escape the city. I had no idea that my sanctuary was about to be ripped away from me. It was an unseasonably warm Saturday in April. I drove up to my lake house, planning to spend the weekend installing the new bathroom vanity I'd ordered. The moment I turned onto the private road, I knew something was wrong. A moving truck was parked in my driveway, and strangers were carrying furniture into my home. For a disorienting moment, I wondered if I'd driven to the wrong house. But no, this was definitely my place. The blue shutters I'd installed last fall. The stone path I'd laid with Trevor. The maple tree where I'd hung a bird feeder. My heart slammed against my ribs, a cold dread seizing me. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of my car. Excuse me, what are you doing at my house? A middle-aged couple turned to me, surprised. The man stepped forward. Can I help you? This is my property, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. You're trespassing. The woman glanced at her husband. There must be some mistake. We purchased this house last week. We just closed on Tuesday. That's impossible. I insisted. I never sold this house. I've owned it for 3 years. The man disappeared into the house and returned with a folder of documents. With shaking hands, I looked through the papers. There it was, in black and white, a deed transfer, a bill of sale, and at the bottom of several pages, what appeared to be my signature. Except I had never signed these documents. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. No answer. I tried Gabriella, straight to voicemail. With a growing sense of dread, I apologized to the confused couple and told them there had been a serious legal issue with their purchase. I took photos of all their documents and drove straight to my family lawyer's office, hoping he might be there on a Saturday. Raymond. Scott had handled my business contracts since I started my company. He looked as surprised to see me as I was to find him in the office, catching up on paperwork. Marcus, what brings you here on a weekend? You look like you've seen a ghost. I spread the photos of the documents on his desk and explained the situation, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. Raymond studied the papers, his frown deepening by the second. This is not right, he said finally. For one thing, I should have been notified as your attorney of record on the property. And this signature. He pulled out a copy of my business incorporation papers for comparison. Similar, but not your handwriting. This is forged work and not particularly good forged work at that. So I can get my house back? I asked, hope flickering. Raymond's expression was grim. We can certainly challenge this in court, but it will take time. And Marcus, someone had to do this. Someone with access to your personal information, your identification. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The only people who had that kind of access to my personal documents were my family members. People I trusted. Who was listed as the seller's agent? I asked quietly. Raymond checked the papers. Diana Turner. My mother. A real estate agent for 25 years. I left Raymond's office with instructions to begin legal proceedings immediately and drove straight to my parents' house. My father's car and my mother's were both in the driveway. So was Gabriella's. I found them in the backyard, gathered around the patio table with wedding catalogs spread out before them, completely oblivious. How could you? I asked, without preamble. My mother looked up, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. Marcus, we weren't expecting you today. Clearly not. You were probably hoping to avoid me until after you sold my house. Oh wait, you already did that. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat. Son, we need to talk about this rationally. Rationally? My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. You forged my signature and sold my property without my knowledge. That's not just a betrayal, it's a crime. We had no choice, my mother said, her tone defensive. The wedding venue fell through. The Flemings had already invited their entire social circle. We needed an alternative fast, and we needed the money to make it happen. So you stole from me? Your own son? We didn't steal, my father countered. That house was just sitting there most of the time. Anyway, we knew you'd want to help your sister. I turned to Gabriella, who had been suspiciously quiet. Did you know about this? She had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. Not at first. They told me after it was done. But Marcus, you have to understand how important this wedding is. Jackson's family expects certain standards. And you're always so successful with your business. You can buy another house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The casualness with which they discussed the theft of my property, as if they'd borrowed a lawnmower without asking. The absolute certainty that my possessions were ultimately family resources. The dismissal of everything I had worked for. The lake house wasn't just a property, I said, my voice low and dangerous. It was my home. The one place that was entirely mine. I worked years to afford it. I put my sweat and time into renovating it. And you sold it for a one-day party. It's not just a party, my mother snapped. It's your sister's wedding, the most important day of her life. We thought you'd understand once we explained. Explained what? That my feelings and my property rights mean nothing to this family. My father stood up. Now you're being dramatic. Of course, we value you, but sometimes family members need to make sacrifices for each other. This wedding has to be perfect. The conversation deteriorated from there. My parents doubled down on their justifications. Gabriella oscillated between looking guilty and entitled. At one point, she actually said, just think of it as your wedding gift to me, Marcus. A really generous one. I knew there was no getting through to any of them. I left their house feeling hollowed out, utterly gutted. On the drive home to my city apartment, I called Trevor, the only person I trusted to understand the magnitude of what had happened. They did what? His outrage was comforting in its genuineness. That's not just messed up, man. That's criminal. Tell me you're pressing charges. I don't know yet, I admitted. They're still my family. Family does not steal your house, Trevor said firmly. What are you going to do? It was a question I would ask myself repeatedly over the sleepless nights that followed. What exactly was I going to do about this betrayal? The family pressure campaign began almost immediately. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was flooded with messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all expressing variations of the same sentiment. I needed to get over myself and support my sister's special day. Your parents have always done everything for you kids, my Aunt Patricia wrote. The least you could do is help make this wedding happen. It was bewildering how quickly and thoroughly my parents had rewritten the narrative. In their version, shared with every extended family member, they had borrowed some money from my house equity with every intention of paying me back someday. My outrage was characterized as selfish and unsupportive. Only my cousin Michael seemed skeptical. Something about this story doesn't add up, he texted. Want to grab a beer and tell me what really happened? I appreciated his offer, but I wasn't ready to discuss it further. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. Instead, I threw myself into work, staying at the office until midnight for a week straight. My employees noticed my mood, but respectfully kept their distance. Only Leah, my girlfriend of 8 months, refused to give me space. She showed up at my apartment on Wednesday night with takeout and a determined expression. You've been avoiding me, she said as she unpacked containers of Thai food on my kitchen counter. Talk to me, Marcus. The whole story spilled out of me in a jumbled, angry rush. Leah listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly incredulous. $150,000, she repeated when I mentioned the sale price of my lake house for a wedding. That is insane. Apparently, the Flemings spent twice that on their daughter's wedding last year, I said, bitterly. My parents are obsessed with matching that standard. And what about the new owners? She asked. The people who bought your house. That was a complication I had been wrestling with. Raymond had explained that the situation put the buyers in a terrible position. They had purchased the property in good faith, unaware of any fraud. If I pursued legal action, they would be forced out of a home they had just moved into. I feel bad for them, I admitted. They're innocent in all this. But it is my house. I can't just let it go. Leah squeezed my hand. Of course you can't. Your parents stole from you and violated your trust. You have every right to be angry and to want justice. Her straightforward support was exactly what I needed. Unlike Trevor, who wanted me to immediately press criminal charges, Leah understood my conflicted feelings. This was my family. Despite everything, I still cared about them. I still remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike, my mother nursing me through childhood illnesses. Those memories made this betrayal even more painful. The next blow came when my mother texted me the wedding budget breakdown, apparently thinking this would somehow justify their actions. The numbers were staggering. Venue, now to be held at the Fleming estate since the lake house was unavailable. $20,000 for tents, staging, and equipment. Catering, $35,000 for a 5-course dinner and open bar for 300 guests. Flowers, $15,000 for elaborate arrangements, including imported blooms. Dress, $12,000 for a custom designer gown. Photography and videography, $18,000 for a team of professionals and drone footage. Entertainment, $20,000 for a live band, string quartet for the ceremony, and a DJ for late night. Miscellaneous decorations, favors, transportation, $30,000. The total came to $150,000. Exactly the amount they had sold my lake house for. Not a penny more, not a penny less. It was as if they had decided on the wedding first, and then figured out how to fund it by taking my property. Unbelievable, right? I showed Leah the text. They could have had a beautiful wedding for a quarter of this price. Have you actually met Jackson's family? Leah asked. Are they really expecting this level of extravagance? It was a good question. I had only met Jackson's parents a few times at group gatherings. They were certainly wealthy and accustomed to luxury, but they had always been perfectly pleasant to me, not the type to judge someone based on the lavishness of a wedding. My opportunity to observe them more closely came at the engagement party the following weekend. It was held at an upscale country club, with my parents playing the role of gracious hosts, as if nothing unusual had happened. They greeted me stiffly when I arrived with Leah, clearly surprised that I had actually shown up. We weren't sure you'd come, my mother said, her smile tight. I'm here for Gabriella, I replied coldly. Nothing has changed regarding what you did. Throughout the evening, I watched Jackson's parents, trying to see what had my family so intimidated. They were certainly polished and well-connected, greeting various local business leaders and politicians by name. But I also noticed how they genuinely seemed to care about Gabriella, making efforts to introduce her to their friends and family with real warmth. At one point, Jackson's father, Arthur, approached me at the bar. Your sister tells me you run your own tech consultancy. Impressive for someone your age. We fell into a surprisingly comfortable conversation about business challenges and opportunities. Not once did he make me feel like I was somehow less than his family because I had built my success rather than inherited it. In fact, he seemed to respect it more. Self-made, he said, nodding approvingly. That builds character that cannot be bought. The interaction left me even more confused about my parents' desperation to impress these people. It seemed to be coming entirely from their own insecurities rather than any actual pressure from the Flemings. The breaking point came during the toasts. After several emotional speeches, my father stood and thanked everyone for coming to celebrate the union of two wonderful families. Then he looked directly at me, and a special thanks to Marcus, whose generosity has made this beautiful wedding possible. We could not have done it without his sacrifice. The audacity took my breath away. Around me, people applauded, completely unaware that my generosity had been theft. Across the room, my mother raised her glass in my direction, her expression challenging me to contradict them publicly. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Leah put a steadying hand on my arm. "Not here," she whispered. "Not like this." She was right. Making a scene would only make me look like the villain in their narrative. Instead, I walked calmly to where Gabriella stood with Jackson and asked for a private word. In the hallway outside the banquet room, I looked my sister in the eye. "I want to be clear about something. I will not be attending your wedding." Her face fell. "Marcus, you can't be serious. It's my wedding day. A wedding funded by stealing my home." I reminded her. "I love you, Gabriella, but I cannot stand by and pretend to celebrate while being victimized by our family. You're being so selfish." Tears welled in her eyes. "This is the most important day of my life, and my house was the most important thing in mine. If you can't see that, then we have nothing more to discuss." I left the party immediately afterward, ignoring the buzzing of my phone as family members realized I had gone and began messaging me with renewed pressure and guilt. Leah was quiet on the drive home, but when we reached my apartment, she turned to me with determination in her eyes. "Enough is enough," she said firmly. "It's time to fight back." The following Monday, I took Leah's advice and scheduled a consultation with Catherine Winters, one of the top real estate attorneys in the city. She reviewed my case with practiced efficiency, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When I finished explaining, she leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "Your case is unusual, but actually quite straightforward from a legal perspective," she said. "The sale of your property was fraudulent. Your signature was forged, which is a criminal offense. The fact that it was done by family members does not change the illegality of the action." "What about the current owners?" I asked, still worried about them. "They didn't know the sale was fraudulent. They are innocent purchasers, yes, but unfortunately they do not have clear title to the property. In real estate law, you cannot transfer what you do not legally own. Your parents did not have the legal right to sell your property, so the sale itself is void." "So I can get my house back?" "Yes, though it will require court proceedings. The current owners will have recourse against your parents for fraud, but not against you. They will be entitled to a full refund plus damages." It was the answer I had been hoping for, but it also meant more complications, more conflict, more family drama. I thanked Catherine and retained her services, leaving her office with a concrete plan of action for the first time since this nightmare began. My next step was to dig deeper into my parents' financial situation. Something about this whole scenario still didn't make sense. My parents had decent jobs and had always seemed financially stable. Why the sudden need to steal from me to fund Gabriella's wedding? I started by checking public records. What I discovered shocked me. My parents had a second mortgage on their home, taken out 3 years ago. There were tax liens from unpaid property taxes for the past 2 years. Credit card judgments. Their financial house was not just messy, it was on the verge of collapse. Armed with this information, I met with Raymond again. "I think they're on the edge of bankruptcy," I told him. "The wedding is just the tip of the iceberg." "That explains the desperation," Raymond said. "But it doesn't excuse the fraud." "No, it doesn't. And there's something else." I hesitated, then continued. "Over the years, they've borrowed money from me for various reasons. Home repairs, a new car when Dad's died, Mom's medical bills when she had surgery 2 years ago. All told, about $40,000 that they promised to repay but never did." Raymond's expression grew more serious. "Do you have documentation of these loans?" I nodded. "Text messages, emails, even some signed IOUs for the larger amounts. I never pressed them about it because they're my parents. I figured they'd pay me back eventually." "This strengthens your case considerably," he said. "It establishes a pattern of financial exploitation." We developed a 3-part legal strategy. First, challenge the fraudulent sale and reclaim my property. Second, file a civil suit against my parents for the $40,000 in unpaid loans. Third, and most difficult for me personally, provide evidence for potential criminal charges related to the forgery. That last part kept me awake at night. The thought of my parents potentially facing criminal penalties was deeply distressing, even after what they had done. I discussed my reservations with Leah over dinner at her apartment. I understand your reluctance, she said, picking at her. Pasta. They are your parents. Despite everything, you still love them. But they showed no such consideration for me, I replied. They stole something precious. From me, without a second thought. Which is why you need to hold them accountable, Leah said firmly. This is not just about the house or the money, Marcus. This is about establishing that they cannot treat you this way. If you let this go, what message does that send? That they can take whatever they want from you, whenever they want it. She was right, and I knew it. But executing the plan was still agonizing. Every step felt like a betrayal of the family bonds I had been raised to believe were sacred. The rational part of my brain understood that they had betrayed those bonds first. But emotion is rarely rational. Trevor provided a different kind of support during this period. While Leah helped me work through the emotional complexities, Trevor gave me space to express my anger without judgment. You have every right to be furious, he said during one of our regular basketball games, the physical exertion helping me channel my emotions. What they did was completely messed up. Sometimes I feel guilty for fighting back, I admitted between shots, like I'm being a bad son. Trevor caught the ball and held it, forcing me to look at him. A parent-child relationship goes both ways. They had responsibilities to you too, and they violated them completely. Being a good son does not mean being a doormat. His blunt assessment was exactly what I needed to hear. That night, I drafted a formal letter to my parents outlining exactly what had happened from my perspective, the legal steps I was taking, and one final opportunity to make things right. Return the money from the house sale, cancel the extravagant wedding plans, and apologize sincerely for the breach of trust. It was a long shot, but I felt I needed to give them one last chance before things escalated beyond the point of no return. I sent the letter by certified mail, requiring a signature to ensure they could not claim they never received it. 3 days later, my father called. His voice was cold and defensive. We got your letter, he said without preamble. Your mother is beside herself. Because of what you did, or because you got caught? I asked. This legal nonsense is unnecessary, he continued, ignoring my question. We are family. We should be able to work things out without lawyers. I tried that approach. You dismissed my feelings and justified stealing from me. We didn't steal. We just made a decision as a family. Sometimes parents know what's best, even for their adult children. It was clear from his tone and words that nothing had changed. They still didn't see what they had done as wrong. They still expected me to simply accept their decision and move on. There was no acknowledgement of my pain, no genuine remorse for violating my trust. I gave you a chance to make this right, I said quietly. You are choosing not to take it. Marcus, be reasonable. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Everything is paid for. Everything is arranged. You can't expect us to undo all that now. Actually, I can. And if you choose not to, then you need to be prepared for what comes. Next, I ended the call feeling strangely calm. The last shred of doubt had been removed. My parents had made their choice, prioritizing Gabriella's wedding over our relationship, over basic decency, over legal and ethical boundaries. Now, I would make mine. The next morning, I called Catherine and gave her the green light to proceed with all 3 parts of our legal strategy. The wheels of justice began to turn, slowly but inexorably. As the wedding date approached, I maintained my resolve to not attend, despite increasing pressure from all sides. Gabriella left tearful voicemails. Relatives sent manipulative messages. Even Jackson called once, clearly uncomfortable and probably put up to it by my sister. I don't really understand what's going on, he said awkwardly. But it would mean a lot to Gabby if you came. Has she told you how the wedding is being funded? I asked. Something about your parents helping out. To be honest, I offered to have my family cover it, but your parents insisted. I almost told him the truth then, but decided against it. It wasn't fair to put him in the middle of our family conflict right before his wedding day. He seemed like a decent guy who genuinely loved my sister. This was between me, my parents, and Gabriella. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment, turning my house key over and over. In my hands, the key to a home I no longer had access to, a symbol of everything I had worked for, and everything that had been taken from me. Leah called to check on me. Are you okay? I've been thinking about tomorrow, I said slowly. And I've made a decision. You're not going to the wedding? She said, a statement rather than a question. Actually, I am. But not as a guest. I think it's time my family faces the consequences of their actions. The Fleming estate was transformed for the occasion, just as my lake house would have been, had things gone according to my parents' original plan. White tints dotted the expansive lawn. Flowers spilled from every conceivable surface. String lights twinkled in the trees, ready to illuminate the evening reception. I arrived just as guests were being seated for the ceremony, parking my car at the far end of the long driveway. I had no intention of disrupting the actual exchange of vows. Whatever my issues with my family, Jackson and Gabriella deserved their moment. Instead, I waited in my car, watching from a distance as my sister, radiant in her designer gown, walked down the aisle on our father's arm. Despite everything, I felt a pang of emotion. She was still my little sister, and part of me still remembered teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with math homework, scaring away the monsters under her bed. After the ceremony, as guests migrated to the reception tent for cocktails, I made my move. I spotted my father near the bar, already looking slightly flushed from champagne and self-satisfaction. He nearly choked on his drink when he saw me. "Marcus, you came after all." His tone was cautious, unsure whether my presence was a peace offering or something else. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, my voice neutral. "Quite a spectacle you've put together." He glanced around proudly. "Yes, well, nothing but the best for your sister. The Flemings have been very impressed with everything." "I'm sure they have been. $150,000 buys quite a show." My father's expression hardened. "I thought we were past this. You're here, so clearly. You've accepted the situation. Is that what you think?" I smiled thinly. "I'm here to witness, not to approve." Before he could respond, my mother appeared at his side, her face registering shock at my presence. "You came," she said, echoing my father. "Does this mean?" "It means nothing has changed," I cut her off. "The legal proceedings are still moving forward." Her face fell. "You would ruin your sister's wedding day with talk of lawsuits." "I am not the one who chose to fund this wedding by stealing my house," I reminded her. "That was your decision." Our tense conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gabriella and Jackson, making their rounds to greet guests. My sister froze when she saw me, then rushed forward to embrace me, nearly spilling Jackson's champagne in her enthusiasm. "You came. I knew you wouldn't miss my wedding." I returned her hug stiffly. "Congratulations, Gabby." She pulled back, studying my face. "Are you still angry? Please say you've forgiven us. It would mean so much to have your blessing today." Her earnestness was almost convincing. Almost. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes. The same self-centered logic that had allowed her to accept the proceeds of my stolen property without true remorse. "I'm here," I said simply. "That is all I can offer right now." Jackson, sensing the tension, extended his hand. "Glad you could make it, Marcus. It means a lot to Gabby." I shook his hand, feeling a twinge of sympathy for him. He seemed genuinely unaware of the family drama he had married into. The reception progressed with the expected sequence of events. Dinner was served, a 5-course extravaganza that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The string quartet played softly in the background. Crystal and silver glinted under the chandeliers hung inside the tent. I kept to myself, politely deflecting questions from relatives about my recent absence from family gatherings. Trevor had offered to come with me for moral support, but I had declined. This was something I needed to do alone. The moment I had been waiting for came after dinner. My father stood and tapped his glass for attention, ready to make his toast as father of the bride. The tent fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Today is a day of joy and celebration," he began, his voice carrying across the space. "Watching my daughter marry the man of her dreams, surrounded by such beauty and elegance, is everything a father could hope for." He continued with emotional reflections on Gabriella's childhood, predictable jokes about gaining a son rather than losing a daughter, and effusive praise for the Fleming family. Then he came to the part one had anticipated. None of this would have been possible without the support of our entire family, particularly my son, Marcus. He gestured toward me, and heads turned in my direction. His extraordinary generosity helped make this spectacular day a reality. Would you join me in thanking him? Applause broke out across the tent. Jackson's father raised his glass in my direction, clearly impressed by what he believed was my voluntary contribution. Gabriella smiled tearfully, while my mother watched me with warning in her eyes, silently pleading with me not to contradict the narrative. I stood slowly, raising my own glass. The applause continued, now mixed with encouraging cheers for me to speak. My father's smile faltered slightly, uncertain what I was about to do. Thank you, I said, waiting for the tent to quiet. Family is indeed important. It is built on trust, respect, and honesty, values I hold dear. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the gathering, which is why I have a special surprise for the occasion. Something to mark this memorable day. From my inside jacket pocket, I withdrew an envelope. Mom, Dad, this came for you yesterday, but I took the liberty of signing for it. Consider it my real wedding contribution. I approached the head table and placed the certified letter from my attorney on the tablecloth between my parents. You might want to read it privately or not. The truth tends to come out eventually, either way. My mother's hand shook as she reached for the envelope. My father's face had drained of color. What is this? He demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Legal documentation of the fraud you committed, I replied, keeping my voice low enough that only those at the head table could hear. Notice of the lawsuit for the return of my property and the $40,000 you borrowed but never repaid, and information about the potential criminal charges for forgery. You cannot be serious, my mother hissed. Here? Now. I thought it fitting, given that you are so publicly thanking me for my contribution to this wedding. The contribution you stole from me. Marcus, please. Gabriella interjected, her eyes wide with panic. Not at my wedding. I am not the one who brought fraud and theft into your wedding, I reminded her. That was their decision. I turned back to the wider audience, who were watching our hushed exchange. With curious expressions, raising my voice to its previous level, I continued as if nothing unusual had happened. To the bride and groom, I wish you a lifetime of honesty and respect. May your relationship be built on stronger foundations than some in this room. With that, I placed my untouched champagne glass on the table and walked calmly toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear the confused murmurs, the rustle of the envelope being opened, my mother's gasp as she read the contents. I did not look back. I had said what I needed to say, done what I needed to do. The rest would unfold according to the legal process I had set in motion. As I reached my car, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. I turned to see Jackson's father approaching, his expression concerned. Marcus, is everything all right? That seemed rather tense. Back there, I considered deflecting, but something in his straightforward manner deserved honesty. No, everything is not all right, but it will be eventually. Legal proceedings have a way of clarifying situations. He frowned. Legal proceedings between family members? Sometimes that is the only recourse when trust has been irreparably broken. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I sense there is much more to this story than has been shared with us. Whatever it is, I hope it resolves fairly. So do I replied, getting into my car. Enjoy the rest of the celebration. As I drove away from the Fleming estate, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for what had been lost, anger still simmering beneath the surface, but also relief. The truth was finally emerging from beneath the lies and justifications. Whatever happened next, I had stood up for myself and refused to be victimized by the people who should have protected me. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since discovering the theft of my lake house, I felt a sense of control returning. I had taken back my power, and now justice would take its course. The repercussions of my wedding day confrontation were swift and far-reaching. By the following morning, my phone was flooded with messages from family members. Their tone dramatically changed now that the truth was emerging. Some expressed shock and sympathy, others demanded explanations. A few steadfastly maintained that I was overreacting to what they still characterized as a misunderstanding. I responded to none of them, focusing instead on the legal proceedings that were now fully in motion. Catherine called with an update 3 days after the wedding. The court has granted our emergency injunction, she informed me. The current occupants cannot make any changes to the property pending resolution of the ownership dispute. How did they respond? I asked, concerned about the innocent buyers caught in this mess. They are understandably upset, but their attorney seems competent. They are already pursuing their own case against your parents for fraudulent representation in the sale. I wouldn't be surprised if criminal charges follow from their side as well. That same afternoon, I received the first direct communication from my parents since the wedding. It was an email from my father, his desperation evident in every word. Marcus, we need to talk. Things have spiraled out of control. The buyers of the lake house are threatening to sue us. Their lawyer says we committed fraud. You have to help us fix this. The audacity was breathtaking. After stealing my property, they now expected me to help them escape the consequences. I forwarded the email to Catherine without responding to my father. The family silence was broken the following week when my cousin Michael showed up at my office unannounced. Your parents are telling everyone you're making this whole thing up, he said without preamble. But I saw the court filing. It's public record. They really did forge your signature and sell your house. Yes, they did. Michael shook his head in disbelief. And the $40,000 in loans? That part is true too. Every penny documented. He let out a low whistle. No wonder you lost it at the wedding. Honestly, I'm surprised you kept it together as well as you did. What is the family saying? I asked, curious despite myself. It's divided. Some people think you should have kept it private, not embarrassed everyone at the wedding. Others are horrified by what your parents did. Aunt Judith is particularly vocal. Says she always knew your mom had a problem with boundaries, but never imagined it went this far. It was strangely validating to hear that at least some family members understood the gravity of what had happened. For weeks, I had felt gaslit by my parents' insistence that their actions were reasonable, even loving. 2 weeks after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Jackson's father, Arthur Fleming. Marcus, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know that Gabriella and Jackson have returned from their honeymoon. There seems to be considerable tension between them. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it. Whatever my issues with my sister, I had never wanted to damage her marriage. Jackson is quite disturbed by what he has learned about the wedding financing. Arthur continued. Apparently, your sister finally told him the full story under pressure. He had no idea the celebration was funded through such questionable means. It's not his fault, I assured him. He was as much in the dark as I was, just in a different way. Indeed. My wife and I want you to know that had we been aware of the situation, we would never have allowed it to proceed. We have our own resources and would have happily contributed to a more modest celebration that did not involve such ethical compromises. His words confirmed what I had suspected all along. The pressure to create an extravagant showcase wedding had come entirely from my parents, not from any actual expectations set by the Flemings. The legal proceedings continued to advance. My parents hired and fired 2 attorneys in quick succession, apparently dissatisfied with the honest assessment of their legal position. Their 3rd lawyer finally convinced them to respond to the lawsuit rather than ignore it. But their answer to the complaint was weak, full of emotional appeals rather than legal defenses. They don't have a case, Catherine told me bluntly. The forgery is provable. The property transfer was clearly fraudulent. The only real question is how much additional damage they will do to themselves by fighting the inevitable. For weeks after the wedding, I received a text message from Gabriella. Can we talk alone? I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. She looked different than she had at the wedding. The radiant bride replaced by an exhausted young woman with shadows under her eyes. Jax and I have been fighting, she admitted after we had settled at a corner table with our drinks. He says he cannot trust me because I knew about the house and didn't tell him. Did you? I asked directly. Know the full story, I mean. She stared into her coffee. Not at first. Mom and Dad told me they had worked out a deal with you, that you had agreed to sell the lake house to help with wedding expenses. I believed them until I saw your reaction that day at their house. Then I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to know how wrong. It was easier to pretend I believed them. It was the first honest thing she had said to me since this whole nightmare began. I appreciated it, even as it confirmed my suspicion that she had chosen willful ignorance over confronting an uncomfortable truth. I'm sorry about the wedding, she continued. Not just what happened with your speech, but the whole thing. It got so out of control. I never wanted such an extravagant event, but Mom and Dad were so insistent. They kept saying we needed to impress the Flemings, that this was our chance to show we belonged in their social circle. The Flemings didn't care about any of that, I told her. Arthur called me. He said they would have been happy to help fund a simpler celebration. Tears welled in her eyes. I know that now. Jackson's parents have been incredibly understanding about the whole mess. More understanding than I deserve. They even offered to help Mom and Dad financially with the lawsuits, but Jackson told them not to. And how do you feel about all this now? I asked. Ashamed, she whispered. I let myself be carried along by Mom and Dad's fantasy. Even when I knew deep down that something was wrong, I prioritized a party over my relationship with my brother. I am so sorry, Marcus. Her apologies seemed genuine, and I felt some of my anger toward her begin to dissolve. Gabriella had always been easily influenced by our parents. It did not excuse her participation, but it did help me understand it. What happens now? She asked. With the lawsuits and everything? The property will be returned to me, I said with certainty. The current buyers will be compensated, likely from the sale of Mom and Dad's house if they cannot come up with the money another way. The loans will need to be repaid as well. They might lose their house. Gabriella looked alarmed. They made choices, Gabby. Choices with consequences. I didn't create this situation. She nodded slowly. I know. It's just hard to imagine them losing everything. I don't want that either, I admitted. But I also cannot simply absorb this level of betrayal and financial damage. They stole from me. They forged my signature. These are serious offenses. As spring turned to summer, the legal machinery continued to grind forward. My parents made one desperate attempt at settlement, offering to acknowledge my ownership of the lake house if I would drop all other claims. Absolutely not, Catherine advised when I brought her the offer. The property is already legally yours. The court has recognized the fraud. They are offering you something you already have in exchange for dropping legitimate claims for damages. I declined the offer. 2 weeks later, the court issued its final ruling. The sale of my lake house was declared void. The buyers were to be compensated for the full purchase price plus $25,000 in damages, to be paid by my parents. My claim for the $40,000 in unpaid loans was also upheld, with interest. To satisfy these judgments, my parents were forced to sell their home of 30 years and liquidate most of their retirement accounts. They moved into a small rental apartment, their financial situation in ruins. The criminal investigation into the forgery was still pending, but Catherine believed there was a good chance the prosecutor would offer a plea deal involving probation, rather than jail time, given my parents' ages and lack of prior criminal history. Throughout this period, Leah remained my steadfast support. How are you feeling about everything? She asked one evening as we walked along the riverfront near my apartment. Conflicted, I admitted. I know they brought this on themselves. I know I had every right to pursue justice, but seeing them lose so much still hurts. Of course it does, she said, squeezing my hand. You wouldn't be the man I love if you took pleasure in their downfall, even after what they did. It was the first time either of us had used the word love, and despite the difficult context, it filled me with warmth. Whatever else had been lost in this ordeal, I had found something precious in Leah's unwavering support and understanding. In late August, nearly 4 months after the wedding day confrontation, I received keys to my lake house from Catherine. The previous occupants had moved out the week before. Their separate legal action against my parents resolved through the same judgments. Trevor insisted on accompanying me for the first visit back to my property. You shouldn't have to face that alone, he said. Plus, I want to see if they messed anything up. We drove up on a perfect summer day, the kind that had originally made me fall in love with the lake. As we turned onto the private road, I felt a mix of emotions, joy at reclaiming my special place, sadness for all that had transpired, anxiety about what condition we might find it in. The house looked largely the same from the outside, though the flower beds I had meticulously maintained had been neglected. Inside, there were minor changes, different furniture arrangements, a few walls painted new colors. But the bones of the place, the parts one had poured my sweat and love into, remained intact. "Welcome home, man," Trevor said, clapping me on the shoulder as we stood on the deck overlooking the water. It did feel like coming home. Despite everything, a home I would need to reclaim, not just legally, but emotionally, washing away the taint of betrayal with new memories. As summer faded into fall, I gradually re-established my routine at the lake house, spending weekends there, continuing the renovation projects that had been interrupted. Leah joined me, often bringing her warmth and perspective to the space. One October afternoon, as we sat on the dock, watching the sunset turn the water to gold, my phone rang. It was Gabriella. "Jackson and I are getting divorced," she said without preamble, her voice thick with tears. "He says he cannot get past what happened, that there was too much deception from the very beginning of our marriage." Despite everything, my heart ached for her. "I'm sorry, Gabby. Don't be. He's right. We started with a lie, a big one. Maybe someday we can try again with honesty as the foundation. But for now, this is the consequence I have to accept." Her words reflected a maturity I had not previously seen in my sister. Perhaps some good had come from this painful chapter after all. "How are Mom and Dad?" I asked, realizing it had been months since I had spoken to them directly. "Struggling. The financial part is hard, but the social fallout has been worse for them. Their friends know what happened. Mom had to leave her real estate firm when her license was suspended pending the criminal case." I felt a twinge of sympathy, quickly followed by the reminder that they had brought this upon themselves through deliberate actions, not mistakes or misunderstandings. "And you?" Gabriella asked. "Are you okay?" I looked out at the peaceful lake, at Leah, sitting beside me, at the home I had reclaimed. "I'm getting there," I told her truthfully, one day at a time. 1 year after the wedding that had torn our family apart, I stood on the new deck of my lake house, surveying the changes. The renovations were finally complete, each one helping to reclaim the space as my own. The bathroom I had planned to update before everything happened now featured a walk-in shower with stone tile. The kitchen had new cabinets and countertops. Even the dock had been rebuilt, wider and stronger than before. But the physical renovations were only part of the healing process. The emotional reconstruction had been more challenging, requiring introspection and difficult decisions about the role my family would play in my life going forward. My parents and I had reached an uneasy truce. After the court judgments were satisfied and the criminal case resolved with a plea deal that included probation and community service, I had agreed to a carefully structured meeting facilitated by a family therapist. It was tense and tearful, with moments of genuine remorse from my mother and more reluctant acknowledgement of wrongdoing from my father. "We got caught up in appearances," my mother admitted during that session. "We were so focused on giving Gabriella this perfect wedding that we lost sight of right and wrong. I cannot expect you to forgive us, but I want you to know that I understand now how deeply we betrayed your trust." My father struggled more with taking full responsibility, still clinging to the justification that they had acted out of love for Gabriella. But even he eventually acknowledged that their methods had been unconscionable. "We should have talked to you," he conceded, "asked for your help rather than taking what was not ours to take." The therapy session did not magically restore our relationship, but it opened a narrow channel of communication. We now exchanged occasional text messages, mostly superficial updates. They had not been invited back to the lake house, and I was not sure they ever would be. Some boundaries, once violated, required permanent reinforcement. My relationship with Gabriella had taken a different path. Her divorce from Jackson finalized quickly, leaving her humbled and reflective. Unlike our parents, she seemed to genuinely understand the magnitude of what had happened and her own complicity in it. I was raised to believe I deserved special treatment, she told me during a lunch meeting 3 months after her marriage ended, that the rules didn't apply to me the same way they did to others. It took losing everything to realize how toxic that mindset was. She had moved to a small apartment, found a job as an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit, and begun the process of building an independent life without the safety net of parental indulgence. I respected her efforts and gradually allowed her back into my life in measured doses. Today, she would be visiting the lake house for the first time since its return to me. The thought made me both anxious and cautiously hopeful. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Leah asked, joining me on the deck with 2 cups of coffee. I accepted one gratefully. "I think so. She has been putting in the work, really trying to change, and this place was special to her, too, growing up. Denying her access forever feels punitive rather than protective at this point." Leah smiled. "I love that you can still find compassion after everything that happened. It's one of the reasons I said yes when you proposed." The simple platinum engagement ring on her finger caught the morning light. Our engagement 3 months ago had been low-key and heartfelt, the opposite of the spectacle that had surrounded Gabriella's wedding. We planned a small ceremony here at the lake in the spring, with only our closest friends in attendance. Trevor, who would serve as my best man, had been instrumental in my healing process. While the legal system had provided external justice, Trevor's steadfast friendship had helped me work through the internal turmoil. Our regular basketball games had evolved into therapeutic sessions, where I could express anger, grief, and eventually hope for the future. You know what I realized? Recently, I had told him during one such game. This whole nightmare taught me who my real family is. The people who stand by me when it matters, who respect my boundaries, who want what is best for me without taking from me. Chosen family, Trevor had replied with a nod. Sometimes more important than the one you're born into. That realization had been transformative. Through this ordeal, I had discovered the strength of my chosen connections, Leah and Trevor chief among them, but also colleagues who had shown understanding during my distracted periods, neighbors who had welcomed me back to the lake with genuine warmth, even Catherine, whose fierce advocacy had gone beyond professional obligation. The sound of tires on gravel announced Gabriella's arrival. I took a deep breath, feeling Leah's reassuring touch on my arm. "Remember, this is your home," she said softly. "You set the terms of engagement here." I nodded, grateful for the reminder. Establishing and maintaining clear boundaries had been one of my most important lessons from therapy. The old Marcus would have compromised his own needs to keep the peace. The person I had become understood that healthy relationships required mutual respect. Gabriella emerged from her car looking nervous but determined. She carried a small, housewarming gift wrapped simply in brown paper. "The place looks amazing," she said by way of greeting, taking in the fresh paint and new landscaping. "You've done so much work." "It has been healing," I replied, leading her inside. Her eyes widened as she took in the transformed interior. "Wow, it's completely different." "Not completely. The spirit of the place is the same, but I needed to reclaim it, make it fully mine again." She nodded in understanding. "I get that." After everything that happened, we settled in the living room with the coffee Leah brought. Conversation was slightly awkward at first, but as the morning progressed, it flowed more naturally. Gabriella shared stories from her new job, her tentative steps toward building a life based on her own efforts rather than parental subsidies. I found myself genuinely interested in her journey, the ways in which failure and consequences had forced her to grow. When she finally presented her gift, I unwrapped it to find a framed photo from our childhood. The 2 of us, fishing off the dock with our grandfather, both missing front teeth and grinning widely. "I found it in a box of old pictures," she explained. "I thought maybe it could be part of reclaiming the good memories of this place, the ones that came before everything got so messed up." The gesture touched me. It acknowledged our shared history without minimizing the pain of recent events. It was perhaps the beginning of a new kind of sibling relationship, one based on adult understanding, rather than the dysfunctional patterns established in our childhood. After Gabriella left, promising to return for a longer visit when she felt more welcome, Leah and I took the canoe out onto the lake. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the autumn trees in a mirror image of red and gold. "What are you thinking about?" Leah asked as we drifted in the middle of the lake. "How different things are from a year ago," I replied. "How much has been lost, but also how much has been gained." The journey had been painful beyond what I could have imagined. The betrayal by my parents had shaken my fundamental trust in family bonds. The legal battle had been stressful and expensive, The emotional toll had affected my work, my sleep, my sense of security. But through that fire, something valuable had been forged. I had discovered my own strength, my capacity to stand firm in the face of manipulation and guilt. I had learned to articulate and defend my boundaries. I had recognized the difference between genuine love, which respects and uplifts, and toxic attachment, which takes and diminishes. Most importantly, I had broken the cycle of unhealthy family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. By refusing to accept my parents' violation, by holding them accountable for their actions, I had rejected the pattern that might otherwise have continued into the next generation. Do you think you will ever fully forgive them? Leah asked, her question gentle but direct. I don't know, I answered honestly. Forgiveness is complicated. I don't want to carry anger forever. It's too heavy, too consuming. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting or allowing someone the opportunity to hurt you again in the same way. Boundaries and forgiveness can coexist, she agreed. You can release the anger without removing the protective walls. As we paddled back toward the dock, I reflected on how this place, my sanctuary, had become the centerpiece of both betrayal and healing. The lake house represented everything I had worked for, everything that had been taken, and everything I had fought to reclaim. Its meaning had evolved, layers of pain now integrated with pride and resilience. That evening, as Leah and I sat by the fire pit, watching stars emerge above the lake, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. The property dispute was resolved. The legal battles were concluded. The emotional wounds were scabbed over, beginning the slow process of forming scars that would always be visible, but would eventually stop hurting. I think the most important thing I learned, I said as we watched the flames dance, is that standing up for yourself is not selfish. For so long, I thought good family members sacrificed their own needs. When asked, now I understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect for boundaries. Without that, it's not love. It's exploitation. Leah rested her head on my shoulder. That is a lesson worth all the pain it took to learn it. She was right. Though I would never have chosen this path, the destination had made me stronger, wiser, more certain of my own worth, and that knowledge would serve me well in building the family Leah and I would create together, one founded on genuine love and respect rather than obligation and control. As the fire burned down to embers, I thought about the journey ahead. The wounds would continue to heal. New memories would gradually overlay the painful ones. Life would move forward, shaped but not defined by what had happened. What's your opinion on setting boundaries with family? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against loved ones who crossed the line? Comment below and let me know. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that. Protecting yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most important relationship to protect is the one with yourself.